All right. Welcome back, listener. Welcome to the Forest Brothers podcast. Today, this is a collaborative episode, a very new thing for the pod. We are collaborating with the wonderful Journey Abroad podcast with its ever more wonderful host, Refilwe Mbai. I don't know hopefully I didn't butcher your last name, but I think that's how it's said. Mbai. You will correct me once you get on, but of course, with my brother Samson and Kosi. So let's Refilo jump in here, and then we'll jump into Samson and Kosi since this is a collaborative joint. Listener, you're in for a treat. So over to you, Refilo.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here today. I'm so excited to be chatting with you. This is also my very first collaboration, my very first panel. So I'm excited to be on here with you and to cross over our listeners.
Indeed. This is like one of those Disney episodes. It's like a crossover between Disney and Nickelodeon or something, all the kids get to have fun today. So
exactly.
Kosi Samson, over to you guys.
Did you hear that, dear listener? You get to have fun today. You are with, once again, the Forest Brothers podcast in collaboration with the Journey Abroad podcast. And dear listener, I am excited to be here with my two brothers, excited to be here with Refilwe. I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation. And without further ado, let's get into it.
Oh, yes. The Forest Brothers podcast has arrived. Today we're arriving with the Journey Abroad podcast, led by the great Refilwe here. I'd like to say hello to our special guest here who's joining us, as well as always say hello to our two brothers from the Forest Brothers podcast. Today we're not talking soccer, but we're talking something very important, education. And I think it's good that people know about it. So we've got Mutsa, we've got Samson. Hello to my two brothers, and let's get the show on the road.
Get the show on the road, indeed. All right. So actually, let's get started by maybe hearing more about Journey Abroad podcast, what you are about, what's your thing, just so the listeners get a feel for what they're getting themselves into here. So I'll just turn it over to you, Phil, to just give a little synopsis on what Journey Abroad podcast is about.
For sure. Thank you very much. Also, that introduction was lovely. Wow. I feel so welcomed. Thank you very much for that. So Journey Abroad is a podcast that highlights the stories of Africans studying and living abroad, and basically their experience, what made them decide to move abroad, what they're studying, how they got onto that journey, what their experience has been like, the positive and the negative, and just kind of share some tips and tricks for anyone who's trying to follow that path too, wherever you are in the world, wherever from the continent of Africa you are from. So perhaps what we could do to get us all started, I usually start the episode by putting everybody in their context. So to my listeners, you are all unfamiliar. So let's put you all in your context. So perhaps we could go around the table and share where we are from, where we live, what we do, and what program we graduated from. So Mutsa, would you like to go first?
Of course. Yeah. Thank you. And just before I jump into that, for your listeners who are wondering who the Forest Brothers podcast are and what we do, we are a football, life, and culture podcast. We mostly talk football. We just finished a series on World Cup. We usually cover the Premier League. So that's a thing. But then we also talk about different things that are just happening in the world. Just a little brief on that. And then so my name is Mutsa. I am Zimbabwean. I went to high school in Eswatini, Swaziland, for those that haven't heard about the name change. But yeah, so Swaziland/Eswatini, I went to high school, college, went to school in Iowa. That's where I went for 4 years in the rural, part of Iowa. Good time, small little city, vibes. Graduated with a BA in economics. And then I left Iowa, went to the DMV, Washington, D.C., where I was working as an assistant for a for-profit company that works with the U.S. government on development. So basically, we were a contractor for USAID. So that's kind of like the work that I used to support. And currently, I'm now in the UK. As you know, international students, OPT runs out. We'll probably get into that. So I hadn't secured H1B at that point. And so, I had to bounce. And now I'm currently in the UK, just trying to figure out the next step in life. So that's my story. But I can throw it over to Samson to talk about his brief journey.
Yeah, brief. I just turned 26, so I'm trying to remind myself it's only been a brief journey. So, yeah, my name is Samson Masanga. I am from Nairobi, Kenya. I spent my first 10 years of life there and then moved over to Mozambique for 3 years, actually 4 years. And during this time in Mozambique, my older brother went to school in Swaziland for IB, the International Baccalaureate Program. And my dad decided I should go with him. So moved over to Swaziland for 6 years, where I met these two guys. We graduated. Mutsu graduated, a year above me, graduated in Kosi, found out I was going to Luther College, and I also found out Mutsu was there, and Kosi was going too, and I was like, well, okay. And the story continued, in Iowa for 4 years with these guys, graduated with a computer science major and a theater minor. And after graduation, moved over to West Virginia to be with my cousin because I didn't have a place to go. I'm a broke college student who just graduated. And found a job there and moved here when I realized I could not live in West Virginia and be remote. Yeah. And yeah, so now I'm in DC and just seeing what else this young life of mine is gonna throw at me next. I am a software engineer. My actual role right now is a front end software engineer. So yeah, I mainly work on websites, doing design, you know, just basic code updates. If something needs to be updated, I do it. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm a software engineer. But yeah, Nkosi, please, you take it away. I'm sure we all want to hear about the man from Eswatini a bit more.
I would certainly hope so. Yes, as Samson and the lovely guests here have mentioned, I've come to become Nkosi in living abroad in the US, but my actual name is Ngosilenhle Mngomezulu. That is me from Eswatini, born and bred in Ezulwini. Funny enough, Musa and I actually lived very close to each other when he lived in Eswatini, for those that didn't know. Now, the fun fact, actually funny enough, is that when I went to Waterford, when I started in Form 2K, for those that don't know, Samson and I started at the exact same time. And to actually go through IB, graduate IB, and then go to Luther College, we were in the same, like we've been through this journey like together for the longest time, for those that essentially don't know, funny enough. Even in freshman dorm, I didn't know Samson would be there. We lived in the same freshman dorm, like down the road, like, but I didn't even know he was coming until that particular day. That's a very interesting story. But yeah, back in college, studied data science major with a minor in computer science. Graduated back in 2020 amidst the pandemic. It was not the greatest time, honestly, in this life of mine or just generally anyone's life at that point. Moved over to Minnesota, found a job at a small yet growing company within the United Healthcare UHC's business, and I primarily work as a data analyst, so I support most of the stuff that we do for the entire organization.
Awesome. Wow. Before I introduce myself, I've got a burning question. How is it that you all ended up at the same college? Do a lot of Waterford students end up going to Luther College? Like, how did this happen?
Since I went first, maybe I can speak to that and I'll let Kosi and Samson. But so there's this thing at Waterford where with United World Colleges, for some people that may not know, they're like how do I describe this? So there are many across the world. I think there are 15, 16 now in different parts. And then we went to the one that was in Swaziland, and essentially there's this rich guy from America, Shelby Davis, and he basically sponsors graduates from the IB program to go to school in mostly American institutions. And some schools develop special relationships with these high schools like we went to. So a representative from Luther College came to Swaziland to give a speech on like Luther, what it offers, yada, yada, yada. I went to that. thought it was nice, like the greenery. They didn't tell me it snowed. I didn't know. I was like, this place looks good. And then I talked to him and I was like, okay. And then I applied and yeah, they gave full funding essentially. And like the only like school that I went to where, well, I applied to two, but Luther's package was the best. And essentially that's just how, I ended up there. And, funny enough, other Waterford students were there as well. So that's kind of what my journey was, to go to Luther College just because they gave the most money. But Nkosi and Samson, maybe they can speak to that too.
Firstly, I want to give a shout out to Shabu Davis. I don't think not just us, but a lot of people that came to the US to study. Like now there's something in life. I think we all should give back to all the work that he's done for us. So there's that aspect. But for me personally, it was as just to second what Mutsa mentioned there. It was a journey, and that journey did lead me to Luther College. The funding was beautiful. I do agree with that. There was that full funding package. I did have offers from other schools, but I just felt that Luther, what they offered in terms of just the different majors, the culture, from what I read online, I didn't know much. But in speaking with people ahead of me that were already at Luther College, that did play a critical role.
Yeah, I second everything Nkosi just said. The package was beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, I did apply to other schools, but yeah, that was this defining factor. And also my brother happened to go to Luther College right before me. So I had a very good resource in terms of getting to understand what the culture was like. And he was full of praise for it. So I was like, all right, let me try it for myself, and it was a great experience. So yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I think the package definitely plays a big factor in where we go to study. So if there's a good funding deal, why not take it? I totally believe that. So in terms of my story, I am from Botswana, born and raised. I then got a scholarship at the end of high school to go do my 12th grade in California. So similar to what you explained with Waterford, my high school had links with schools in the US. And basically, this was to help students apply to North American schools to help us with SAT prep and doing the Common App application and those kinds of things. So I went to the US, I went to California. Admittedly, the United States was not my dream location. I actually wanted to go to Waterford for IB. I really, really wanted to. My parents couldn't afford it, unfortunately. And at the time, it seemed like my best option was to take the scholarship and go to the US. So because the US was not, as I said, my dream location, I ended up applying for Canadian schools as well. So while I was there, I got into McGill University. I took some time off between high school and university just to figure out my interests and all of that. How I came across McGill was because I was looking into medicine, and the medical program at McGill was really interesting. Spoiler alert, I did not end up going for med. I ended up doing my undergrad in psychology at McGill, and then I went straight into a master's program in neuroscience and then fast-tracked or transferred into the PhD program in neuroscience. And that's what I'm currently doing now. I wish I could say that I have some real world experience. I haven't done the adulting thing yet. I'm postponing that as long as I possibly can by doing a 6-year-long PhD, but that's my story.
Wait, so quick question. So you went to California to a high school there. How long, is that what happened? Like, how long were you in that school doing those ACTs, and were you there for a year, and then afterwards you applied to different colleges in the US and then Canada, or did you only apply to colleges in Canada? Well, I guess you'd have applied to US schools too, right? But what is that like just being there as a high school student? Because we only went as college students. So I kind of wonder what your impressions were going there as a fresh high school student from Botswana going to California. Also, where in Cali were you? I think that makes a big difference. So I just want to kind of hear about that. What was your scenario and situation when you landed in California, and for how long were you there for?
Good questions. So I was in the Bay Area of California. So this is San Francisco area. I was actually a little south, so in the area that Stanford is in, Palo Alto, Menlo area. And I went for 12th grade. So at the time, I'd finished my IGCSE, and the point of this was really to bypass A levels, bypass the international baccalaureate, and kind of do it in the span of a year. So I was there for, I guess, the school year, which is about 10 months. So going there, it was very challenging. As soon as I arrived, I kind of had to hit the ball running, kind of schedule SAT exams, start applying to schools, because the deadlines for a lot of colleges and universities is December 1st, and I was arriving like late August. So I really had to hit the ball running. It was a very weird experience because, of course, these are all seniors. They've all been together from freshmen all the way through. So everybody's friend groups were very established already. So I found it a little challenging to find my way in. I also think that my experience was tainted by the fact that I didn't really want to be there, even though I do recognize that it was a wonderful opportunity. I'm grateful for the scholarship, of course. But at the time, I was like, the US is not really for me. But yes, so I was there for 10 months in the Bay Area of California, so Northern California.
And just a follow-up question. California, especially the Bay Area, is very expensive. So where were you like staying? I'm just wondering, like, what were you living with, like a host family situation, or like what was that like? And just another follow-up question to that, are other students from Botswana also, is that still like an ongoing thing where they like go to San Fran and do that year? And then I'm just curious, in case we have a listener who is thinking about this in Botswana and they hear that it's actually possible, what does that look like? Is that an ongoing thing? And where do they go to stay? What does the food situation look like? Just curious about all that too.
Mm-hmm. So the high school that I went to, Maropula in Botswana, in Gaborone, it had links with 8 different schools in the United States, so spread really across the country. So there were some schools in Massachusetts, some in Connecticut, one in Oregon, one in California. And your living situation really depended on the school. So some of these schools were boarding schools, so you lived on campus. Menlo, the school that I was at, is not a boarding school, so I lived with host families. Unfortunately, one family could not host me for the entire duration of my time there, so I ended up staying with 4 different families, which was a ride. But it was also a very interesting experience. As you mentioned, Northern California, at least that San Fran area, is quite wealthy. I think that was the biggest shock to my system. I'd never been around people who had that kind of money. Like, there were students driving to school in Mustangs, in Range Rovers. Every girl had Lululemon leggings. Like, it was a lot of really wealthy people. Even Estee Lauder's grandson was in my grade, which was wild to me. And I think I had a lot of challenges with that, just firstly comparing Botswana pula to US dollars, but also just, the amount of money their families had and my families had. So it's quite the shock to my system for sure.
So I do have like just one quick question, like in terms of just like being in Canada, in Canada and your time in the US, like for like all the listeners out there that are just thinking about like their next move or their career choices and stuff like that, what was the one determining factor for you that from studying psychology, like how would you then switch over to something it's kind of similar but kind of also different? Like what drove that certain decision?
Sorry, just to clarify your question, are you asking me the move from California to Canada or the move from psychology to neuroscience? I just want to make sure I answer right.
The move from sure thing. So the move from psychology to neuroscience.
For sure. Okay, so the psychology program is very interesting in that there's not much you can do with a bachelor's degree in psychology. You really have to go further, pursue further studies. So I went into psychology thinking that I would go into clinical psychology. I wanted to be a therapist at the time. And in order to get into grad school, you need to get research experience. So I started volunteering in labs. And the second lab that I joined was a neuroscience lab. It was a lab that looked at childhood experiences and how they change your brain. And I was super interested in that topic. So that's why I volunteered in this lab, and I really enjoyed my time there. So at the end of my undergrad, and I'd applied to clinical psychology programs and didn't get in, I went to my supervisor and I was like, look, I like this research. I'm really interested in your lab. Can I stay? Can I do a master's with you? And because of the nature of the work that he was doing, it fell more in the area of neuroscience. So that's why I happened to switch into neuroscience. Though there are significant overlaps between psychology and neuroscience and psychiatry, like the mental health kind of fields, there's a lot of overlap in them. So it was a very smooth transition, but really what got me from psychology into neuroscience was the lab, was the supervisor, was the research topic.
Okay, and just so it doesn't sound like we're grilling you, this is the last question, and maybe we'll like switch over to something else. But just a quick question. I think that first question that Kosi was asking, I think was also valuable in the sense that we don't see many people go to the US as high school students, and then you apply to schools in Canada as well, and you go. So I think maybe your experience is a bit unique in the sense that you applied to both American schools and Canadian schools whilst in America. What are the differences in application processes? Like, if you remember, like what was it like to apply to Canadian schools? What did you need to do to even get there? And was it seamless? Was it a lot more than what is required for US school? Just in case, we have some people who are thinking about going to Canada. I'm thinking about it, but I think maybe it might be a bit different at this point because I'm a bit later on in stages of life and stuff. But yeah, just quickly, I mean, like, what was that application process like? What did you have to do to just get that Canada thing going? McGill is a great school, so interested just to hear about that.
Very good question. And I'd actually also like to hear what your experiences were like applying to schools. So correct me, jump in if you think I'm going left, but the American college application process is very intense. So you've got to take SATs. Some schools are affiliated with what's called the Common App. So you apply through this other platform, I guess, that takes in all your essays, all your information, and sends it to the schools that you're applying to. Canadian schools, a lot simpler. I literally just sent in my transcript and that was it. So like filled in my basic information and that was it. I didn't really need to fill out like a Common App essay or write a Common App essay or I don't know, write about some challenge that I've overcome, in the same way that American colleges ask for. So it was a lot easier. I'd applied to, I think it was like 10 American colleges and McGill was the only Canadian one. McGill was right at the end and it was just like click, 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 send, which was nice and easy. I mean, the experience is different when you're applying to graduate school, of course. There's a lot more required for graduate school. So at the undergraduate level in Canada, you don't need to do SATs. You don't need to submit those unless you're coming from an American university, but otherwise that's not a requirement. Whereas for graduate school, the GRE is required, and that's kind of like the SAT for graduate school. So you do need to apply, you do need to take standardized testing for graduate schools, and you do need to submit a personal statement. There's a lot more to graduate applications in Canada than to undergraduate applications, but definitely a lot easier than American applications. So I'd like to hear what your process was like, especially with this relationship that Waterford had with various institutions in the US. Did you have help with that? Did you have SAT prep? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think I could maybe speak to that. Although wait, before I launch, just one question. At this point, we are probably grilling you, but you'll get over it. Like I've been looking at potentially migrating to Canada because my brother's currently there. And every time I look at one of these applications, especially the visa ones, there's always talk of like a language test that people need to take. Did you ever have to take any sort of language like tests in advance of going to your university there, or just basic migrating there?
I've never had to. McGill is in Quebec, which is a French province, but it's in Montreal, which is a bilingual city. McGill is an English university, and I didn't have to take any language tests because all my prior studying was done in English. So I'm curious if you also had to take any language tests.
Okay, so yeah, when you talk about the Common App before, I think that was mostly my experience. Because I think most of the schools, or if not all the American schools I applied to, I just used Common App. So did the personal statements, put in my basic info, put in my SAT test scores, and paid the fees for each individual institution. And that was it. Aside from that, obviously you have to take the SAT separately, and we had practice tests that we could take of the SATs. And we also had, although a lot of this stuff was just personal, like you had to go and get your own, like, like booking, like the study book, that you can get, like all of the SAT stuff and SAT prep, that was like on your own, just you figure it out. Obviously work with your parents or whoever you have in your life and just do it. But yeah, you could sign up through the UWC where I had to take the SAT, and guys often tried to take them 2 or 3 times, just because there was the general perception that you will never get it where you want it to be on your first try. So, and the school was very helpful in that, like letting us know that you might need to, like go study, or you might need to take this a few times, or talk to your guardians, your parents, let them know that this is how like you have to do this thing. So yeah. And also when applying to college, I guess we had like one advisor technically, right? Like it's just store, which is kind of funny when you get to college and there's like 10 people you can talk to about anything at any time. We had one advisor for all majors. His name was Mr. Storer, bless his heart. And I think he's still going. Lester fan for our Force Brothers listeners. So he had a very great 2016 at my expense. But anyways, Mr. Storer, he's kind of the go-to guy for figuring out what college you want to go to, and he has I guess a point system where in IB your final grade comes down to points, right? So you take 6 classes. The max you can get in each subject is 7 points. That's like a star. Like you did fantastically well. So the maximum amount of points you can get in total is 42. That's all the classes, and then plus 3 extra. Your E squared, which is your extended essay, and 1 for TOK, which is theory of knowledge. The extra 3 people usually get because the school makes sure you get them. They work with you very hard on those. And the 42 is kind of up to you. It's how you're applying yourself, how you're studying, how well you do in school. So yeah, Mr. Storer had a point system where he would rank previous classes, because he would just talk to people who've gone to like NYU or this place or that place and be like, hey, you went there, how many points did you get? And they would tell him, hey, I got this, I went there. And so he kind of had like a list of all these schools and what it took for you to get there. And he would print that and give it to students, and they would be like, okay, I think based on the grades I've been getting, I will apply to these schools here, or I'll apply to these schools here, type of thing. And I think, as far as I can remember, that was like the full extent of college prep from like the Waterford perspective. And then the rest was just kind of, how well you did and how much you applied yourself and how much time you spent, trying to improve this stuff. So yeah.
So yeah, I was just gonna say, because what Samson is talking about is interesting, but I think that's like the full extent of it. But I was gonna say this was just sparked a lot for me right now, because I remember because Mr. Storer was the only person. And so there was that thing when like you give you a paper and you'd be like, these are your projected points. And you'd be like, yeah, my guy, you are not good enough to go to Harvard based on what you can do here. And so that was like a thing, right? It's like these are the 10 schools you can get into. Outside of this, you're not making it. And I mean, it's efficient, right? Because it's like it limits how many, like it keeps you focused, but then it can also be limiting in a way, right? And then there's like the other side of like, okay, the US, you get full funding for the most part, but the UK, there are no scholarships. For Canada, there are no scholarships. So you just apply there. And to me, in my head, it always seemed like the UK is like, there's no way my parents can afford that. It's like, this thing is expensive. And it is money, but if you actually look at it comparatively, Luther College, when we went, I think it was cost like maybe $54,000 a year per student. Whereas undergrad in Canada, like, okay, even in the UK right now, I'm currently in Leeds. Undergrad here, even if you're a foreign student, you're not paying more than £6,000, right? Per year, or like per semester or something. It's very cheap as compared to the US. In Canada, I think it's more or less the same. I think maybe you're paying like 15,000 CAD for a year, depending on which school you go to, which in retrospect is not that bad as you compare to like going to some of these schools in the US where it costs you 80,000 per year if you're gonna pay out of pocket, right? And that's why a lot of American students are in student debt, as you've heard, like if you've seen the whole thing, right? So I don't know. And then so I kind of want us to talk about for people who are maybe about to graduate high school and want to go to school in either the US or Canada or the UK. I was not given the pros and cons for every one of those places. I was just told the US is where you go to. I didn't hear a push to go to Canada. So the one thing that I heard about Canada is like, the one thing I do know is if you do your undergrad in Canada, you spend 4 years. I think if you're going to work, you basically get our equivalent of the OPT, which is like, I think you get 2 or 3 years of it. But then because you've been in undergrad for 4 years, as soon as you graduate, you're eligible for permanent residency, if I'm not mistaken. I might be, but I think in a year or two, you can get PR. And once you get PR, you can get citizenship in like another 2 or 3 years and you're done. Whereas in the USA, you do your undergrad, depending on what you do, that's STEM, because I think in Canada it doesn't matter. As long as you're there for undergrad, the full 4 years, you can get that PR thing. Whereas in the US, like, you know, if you do a STEM subject like math, science, engineering, all those things, you get 3 years OPT to work. Or if you do like psychology, for example, you get 1 year and then that's it. And then you either go to do your master's or you bounce. So fortunately for me, I did econ. So I got the 3 years, but my OPT ended and now I had to get H1B or get sponsored or whatever. I didn't get that either. My company didn't sponsor. So I had to make a plan and or go to grad school in America or go to grad school somewhere else or leave. And I mean, I left, but that's not a situation in Canada. So long term in Canada, it sounds like if you go, yeah, you might not get a scholarship, but once you get the 4 years done, you're basically set in Canada and you're good to go. You don't actually have to leave. You get PR, you get a citizenship and you're done. Your papers are secured, you're stable. Whereas here in the US, our hairs grow old because OPT is running out and you have to figure out a plan. You have to make a plan, right? It's not stable. You can literally be in America for 10 years, even 15 years and still not have papers because you can do 4 years undergrad, 3 years OPT, you go to do a master's degree, 2 years, you get another OPT for 3 years. That's how many? 5, 4, 9. You get another OPT for 2 more years, 12, and that's it. If you don't have H1B, you don't have a sponsorship, you're not married, you have to bounce. Imagine 12 years in the country, you have to bounce. In Canada, that's not the case. So I don't know. I kind of want to like, maybe we talk about that a little as to whether advisors should do a better job in informing students about the pros and cons, especially after we graduate. Because I think if a lot of us knew about what it's like once you graduate, we'll make different choices. Like, is America really worth it? Yeah, they make more money in America as compared to the UK and Canada, but stability wise, if you like, for me, I come from Zim, I'm not trying to go back there. No Zimbabwean is trying to go back there. So you have to basically emigrate, like you have to stay where you're at. You can't go back home. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. So I don't know. I think that's just like a wider conversation that I think maybe we should have. I don't know what you guys think about this, but I'll take it to you guys. What do you guys think?
Mitsa, you're so right about all these differences with like depending on the country that you choose to study in. So I think when deciding to study abroad or deciding which country to study abroad in, it's definitely, you need to think about it very carefully. One of the reasons that I picked McGill over the schools that I had applied to and gotten into in the US came down to how much the tuition cost. So at the time, I thought I would be paying out of pocket. And at McGill, I was looking at $18,000 a year, Canadian dollars a year, compared to like 52,000 US dollars, which out of pocket, there's no way, ain't no way. But valid point that there are a lot of scholarships in the US, a lot more than the UK or Canada. So it also depends on what your financial situation is at the time that you're applying. And just speaking all of this, Samson, you were reminding me of how you needed to take SAT multiple times, or it's encouraged to take the SAT multiple times. It just reminds me how inaccessible all of this is. It's so expensive. You know, you're applying to, say, 10 schools, each one is 100 and something US dollars. Then you've got to pay to take the SAT, not once, but twice, maybe even 3 times, depending on what your scores are like. And then, yeah, it's a lot to factor in. But for sure, being in Canada, I didn't know this before I moved here, but it definitely is easier to stay here long term. So once you graduate, you're eligible for a postgraduate work visa, regardless of what your undergraduate degree was. If you did what's the word? A shorter degree, like not a full bachelor's degree, you are still eligible for a postgraduate work visa. It's just the time that they give you it for is shorter. So with a regular bachelor's degree, it's 3 years. And then after that point, then you can start applying for PR. You can then start applying for citizenship after you've had PR for a certain point. So it definitely does make it easier to stay. And I mean, depending on whether you want to move abroad and stay abroad, you could factor those things in. I personally am on a scholarship that requires me to return back or pay the money back at the end. So I wasn't even thinking about the end goal, but very important points to bring up. And depending on what your degree was before, like your high school degree is, whether it's IB or A levels, you might be able to, in Canada, do a shorter undergraduate degree. So some of your credits can spill over into your undergrad, which is nice. Coming from 12th grade in the US, a US program, I wasn't able to get those extra credits. So I had to do a 4-year program. Whereas I know people who came in with IB, International Baccalaureate, or A levels who were able to do that for a shorter period of time. And that doesn't affect your postgraduate work visa. You can still qualify for the full 3 years of the degree. But yeah, very interesting points to consider for sure. So Nkosi, I remember you saying that you moved to Minnesota and stayed there. How easy was it for you to make that transition from university into now the workforce?
I would say generally it's not that difficult because like you've prepared mentally for it. It's just that for us personally, and I think Samson and Mamut is a bit different because he graduated a year earlier. It was a bit difficult because it was the pandemic. Jobs were very scarce and stuff like that. So it was really hard because like you don't know like people you see left and right in the news and stuff like that. Wherever you read on the internet, people are being laid off and you're like, am I really gonna find a job in this market? Because funny enough, like a lot of people that were actually in undergrad with us, across like that were in high school with, like after like the I think graduation, they went back home because they were like, there's no need to be here. Like there isn't that opportunity to work. And for us personally, like I was fortunate enough to actually be offered a job at a company and grow with that company that I'm still at right now. And the other positive factor that I don't know, like for us personally, like that we haven't gotten used to is that we started working from home immediately. Like we haven't like post graduation, we haven't like experienced what it's like to actually work in an office. So there is that aspect. But honestly, like I think when we speak about like the US, there are a lot of similarities with what you just mentioned, like from a Canada perspective on like just the paperwork. And I just want to touch on like the SAT, the Common App. And I don't know, like I think it's critical that we mention this for our listeners out there, is that especially like when it comes to like the Common App, and you may think like from an outsider's perspective, because going into like high school at Waterford, I want to just mention this for all our listeners. You would think when people say you're going to the US, you can choose from any school you want. That is technically true, but they had a specific list of like Davy schools that were sponsored, and it was limited, I think, to 90 schools at that time when we were applying. I think it's grown to close to 100 now, fortunately enough. But yeah, there was that aspect. So it did include like majority of the schools. So just wanted to just clear that up if some of our listeners out there think if they say you go to Waterford, you're done, you can now go to any school in the US. It's not really the case, but yeah, there is that aspect. So I don't know. we've asked you so many questions. Like, what questions do you have for the Forest Brothers podcast?
Thank you for finally letting me ask some questions. So I'm wondering, you know, studying abroad always seems to be this very glamorized thing. It's like, oh, you're going to the great beyond, especially going to the US. It's like you're living this American dream. But I'm sure you can all attest to the fact that it isn't all that easy. There are a lot of challenges that come with moving abroad, whether that is adaptations to weather, culture shock, or any of that. So I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that you've faced in the time that you've moved abroad? We could start with you, Samson.
Challenges faced. So I don't think I've had many. And I think it's mainly because I had the opportunity of, number one, leaving Kenya when I was 13 years old to go live in Mozambique and then going to boarding school in Eswatini. So I was already kind of used to this idea that for most of the year I won't be at home and then I'll just be visiting. And then it seems like year on year since like 2010, actually year on year since about 2007, those visits have just been less frequent over time. But like gradually, which, is not ideal, but I've been able to adapt. And yeah, but there has been some awkwardness just because, yeah, you go from a country where just about everyone looks like you to a country where, well, the first country where it's like, okay, like not everyone, but like 70% look like me, but they all speak something else. They all speak Portuguese. And then you go to Swaziland, well, like, yeah, like just about everyone here looks like you, but they speak Siswati, or Zulu, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. So, and then from there, it's the States, and the States is weird because it's like, okay, English, it's comfortable, it's whatever. There's rap music that's, which I like, and movies and TV shows, great, but like, there's police violence, and there's like, you know, just systemic racism. So it's taught me over time that there's no place like home. That's number one. And number two, yeah, home, like because I used to be very critical of Kenya. I still am, politically and socially, but I think there's a lot more to appreciate there. And also you also kind of just learn. I mean, I've just learned, to just deal with it. Just like I look at all the places I've been to and I kind of see them as being the same. I see all the similarities that these places have. The people don't really change much, and you kind of understand why people are the way they are based on where they are in the world. And at least for me, that helps me interact with people better, helps me make friends a bit better, helps me move around a bit better. But yeah, the same sort of things that people always talk about when they're abroad are still there, still miss family, still get lonely because it's not always easy to meet new people. It's not always easy to try new things. Me moving to DC this past year has been like that was a major step, but I was able to do it. So yeah, difficult, yes, but I feel like I've been in a unique position to adapt to that. And yeah, just adapt. What about you, Muta?
Yeah, there's a lot here because okay, firstly, let me just say my experience, as someone coming from Africa, and you see the United States, for example, on TV, you see your New Yorks, you see your Californias, just vibes, and then you think that that's what America all is, but it's like, no, specific places. You see black people here and there, we see rappers, we see whatevers. You never really see on TV predominantly white spaces and predominantly white colleges, right? So when I was going to Luther in Iowa, I was like, vibes. I'm gonna come there, chilling. I'm gonna be sitting around in the cafeteria with Pharrell. Vibes, just and then you land in Minneapolis. You're like, okay, this is decent. You get in the bus and you start driving down. and the city starts getting smaller and smaller, and then boom, you hit a patch of farm, and like, where am I right now? This doesn't look like it ends well for a Black person. And it just gets worse from that point on. So I got to Luther at night, which makes it even worse because you get there and you're like, it's kind of dark right now. Am I? And then you get into the dorm, you by yourself. Like that first night is really hard actually, because what happened in my experience, it was like the soccer guys, because usually it's the athletes that are on school first, right? For like preseason camp, right? So they're the ones that like, get you when you arrive, help you to bags to your room, and that's it. There's no like, okay, leave your bags here, come, let's grab a bite to eat, let's chill. None of that. In my experience, it drops you in your room, vibes, good night. I'm like, cool. And at that point, you don't know, like, you don't have the Wi-Fi, also time difference, your family's asleep. So you're really by yourself, like that first night, and you're like, damn, that's how it was for me. And like that night was kind of tough because it's like, wow, I'm actually in this new place far away. I've never been here before. I'm by myself. And then it gets better after that. So that was the biggest culture shock, the fact that, being in a small town, it's not what you expect. So that took time for me to get used to. And for the longest time, I wanted to leave. I remember just saying, what am I doing here? Because econ wasn't as strong at that time. And I was like, what am I going to do with myself? So it's only until I interned in DC. And that's what I did. People are like, Mutsa, everyone goes to Minneapolis. I'm like, nope, I've had enough of the Midwest. I'm going to go see where my Black homies at. Flew over to DC. I have not looked back. So that has kind of been my experience. But I think I think maybe this is something we can touch on later, but just international student mental health, because I know a lot of people, there's that thing where when you're leaving respective African countries to go to America, and when you're there, there's this image of people when they have like, oh, you've made it out, you're good, you have no reason to complain, like, guys, I'm lonely as hell out here, or guys, it's tough. People at home don't want to hear about that because they're like, you made it out, what are you complaining about? And so you can't really complain to people at home. And then when you try to complain to respective institutions, like, you guys can do better for international students, they're like, you should be grateful you're right here. What do you have to complain about? So it's like, you can't complain at school, you can't complain at home. Your friends are going through the same thing. If I'm depressed, I don't want you to come into me talking about your own depression stuff. You know what I mean? So it's like, you kind of don't have anyone to really talk to in that sense. And I think a lot of people may feel that way, but we don't really talk about it. So I think if that's something if that's a conversation we can have today, maybe it'd be really helpful for some people to know that, like, yo, man, we recognize that it's tough out here, especially for internationals. And I think that's one thing as well. You kind of have to learn how to self-regulate. And for a lot of people, they don't know how to do that, depending on like what your experiences have been growing up. So maybe that's a conversation we can have just about that aspect of being an international student. Like, yeah, we're out here, but we're missing out on so much socially and emotionally, and you kind of have to fend for yourself out here. So that's what my experience was. Nkosi, you can talk about yours.
Sure. I'd say for me, like, I do agree with what you were talking about, like the culture shock aspect. That was essentially big for me because I remember as I walked into, like, well, for me, like, it wasn't maybe as bad as I thought it would be. Like, I walked in and my boy Samson was there. I met Mutsa, I met all the guys from WK. So it kind of felt like a little family for me per se. So I was like, oh, these are my people. These are the people I was with back in WK. There isn't that much of a difference. I met new guys and they were cool and everything. So that wasn't as bad. But I think for me, like, the culture shock was like on the education part. Like, I think coming in, you get there, they tell you, oh, you're gonna have to go to one class 3 times a week. And I was like, oh, damn, that's it? I was like, oh, I'm going to be cruising here. But then what they don't tell you is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done within that 1 hour each day you go in. I remember going into my first college class at 8 a.m., made the mistake of taking an 8 a.m. class, not a morning person. What a mess. Walked in there, I see our friends there just sitting there, a bunch of people. And I'm like, this looks like a very I'd say like a different class. I think I'm in the wrong place. So as I'm about to walk out, the teacher walks in and he's like, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "I think I'm in the wrong place." And he's like, "What's your name?" And I'm like, "Nikosi." And then I walk, and then he's like, "Oh, really? You in this class?" And then I sit down, and funny enough, there was another brother of color next to me, and I was like, "Oh, thank God I can survive this class because all the people didn't look like me." Because coming from a place where everyone looks like you, and you get to a place where no one looks like you, it kind of is a challenge. So my first couple of classes were quite challenging in that regard because I was like, I'd go into a class and be like, "Is this the right place?" And then be like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's me." And then they'll be like, "Oh yeah, since yeah, you're in the right place." And yeah, it did take me a bit of time, funny enough.
Just a quick question here and I think this is for everyone. Does everyone remember going from like, when you're in class in Africa, whatever country you're in Africa, you're in class and you get called upon by the teacher when you know something. You get called upon when the teacher thinks you have the right answer to the question. And then you go to college in America or Canada and you get called on because you're the designated black person or the designated African person. Because that happened to me, like it stopped mattering whether I knew shit or not. Like it did not matter at all. I could have zero knowledge. I remember being asked about Nigeria, being asked about Ghana, being asked about Egypt. Like I got asked about anything African all the time. So I'm keen to hear from you guys. Like, did you guys have a similar experience? I know Nkosi definitely did because um, we were in the same year and we spoke about this in the Paideia class we took. Uh, we often got in that particular class, we often got those questions. But yeah, Mutsa, Rafula, I'm keen to hear. Did you guys experience that too?
Oh, certainly. That was fun enough. I think that was a given, especially when they were talking about the great continent of Africa. Like you were the go-to for a lot of stuff, and people would just ask you, and you just be like, "Oh yeah, I can answer this one." This one. Sometimes you'd even guess. Like sometimes you'd even tell the wrong thing, and they would know. Like you're the one that that can make this stuff up, and it's just interesting to hear. But for me, like that was like the biggest piece, like just ensuring that you don't take it too hard because when you take it too hard, it can affect you mentally and socially. So it was just like for me, I'd say just yeah, I can answer these questions. I don't really think of like other people's perception like that highly. Like if they want to judge me because I know some of the stuff or I don't know some of the stuff, like that's on them. Like if I can sleep at night and be good mentally, I don't really care.
Yeah, I don't think I got too many sus questions about certain things, but I do remember like a couple of comments, even from like parents, of like, "Oh, Mutsa, you speak really good English. We get that one all the time, right? You speak nice, you speak or whatever." Even students are like, "Bro, you can speak English better than me," and I'm like, "Thank you." And then I don't know. I'm like, bro, I literally come from I've been speaking English since I was born, and I speak another language too. I think that was like maybe something where I'm just like, they'll be like, once they speak English, and I'm like, yeah, you too. And then that's just how. And then the other thing I would do is because at the end of the day, listen, if you already don't know, I'm a pretty wild guy. I say some pretty wild things, and people will ask me certain things. They'll be like, oh, Mutsa, like, did you have any pets back there? And I'm like, oh yeah, I had a pet elephant called Peanut. That was my boy. He lived outside my yard. Like, yeah, a pet elephant. I'm like, yeah, bro, everyone has one of those. I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, yeah, bro. Ride zebras to work. Play with Rafiki after school. Just vibes. Yeah, I've actually said way worse things, but I don't want to scare away Refilo's listeners because of like, who's this guy you brought on the pod? I've said some pretty wild things to certain people, and to this day, they still hold those things. They're like, yeah, that guy owns an elephant. Oh yeah, that guy does this thing. And I'm like, when would you learn? When would you learn? But anyway, that's kind of, so you know what? This was our American experience. Refila, what is it like in Canada? Are Canadians more or less ignorant when it comes to life outside of Canada? Or, I think Canada is a bit more, from what I've seen, diverse, depending on where you are. I don't know how it's like in Montreal. I know Toronto is a bit more diverse. I don't know how Montreal is, so I might be lying about that, but correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, what's your experience? What was your experience as an international student, as a Black woman in Canada?
So I definitely say that I got fewer questions in Canada than I did in the US. And speaking to the experience of, being in school and in class, the psychology program at McGill is huge, very, very huge. So each of my classes was 600 people. So that to me was a big shock, just going in and, the teacher doesn't know my name. I don't know, of course I know the teacher's name, but I don't really talk to very many people in the class. I just kind of go in, listen, head out. So that was a very different experience for me, especially from all the schools that I've gone to before. But I definitely say that Montreal is a very diverse city. It's a very international city. McGill is a very international institution. So thankfully, I haven't had any weird questions here. Some of the weird questions that I did get in the US were there was something that happened. So I was taking an intro to law class when I was in California, and I'm forgetting exactly what happened, but there was something that happened in Kenya at a shopping mall. I can't remember what exactly happened, but it was in the news. And forgive me for my ignorance. And my teacher at the time comes into the class and he's like, "Hey, you're from Africa. Can you tell us what's going on in Kenya?" I'm like, no, I cannot. Besides what I've seen on the news that you've also seen, no, I don't know anybody in Kenya. I'm not from Kenya. Why would I know these things? One of the other things that happened, so I was staying with host families, as I had mentioned, and I was at the grocery store with one of my host mothers. I don't know how to phrase that, but she ran into one of her friends and was like, "Oh, look, this is our student from Botswana. Here she is." So then the friend then looks at me and she's like, "Hello, nice to meet you." I was like, "What?" You can speak normally. I speak English. You don't need to speak slower for me. So as soon as I started speaking, she was like, "Oh my goodness." She was kind of taken aback. She didn't expect that I could speak English or that I could be articulate, quote unquote. I know that's what a lot of Black people, a lot of people from Africa specifically get, especially when they speak. But in terms of my experience in Montreal, it's been very, very chill. The only thing really is that for a lot of people that I meet, I'm the first person from Botswana that they are coming across, which understandable. Botswana is a small country. There's like 2.3 million people in the entire country. And I think right now there are maybe 6 people from Botswana at McGill. So fair, I get it. I don't expect a lot. So I'm always like, I'm from Botswana. It's just north of South Africa. I've always got to give some landmarks just to help folks situate themselves. But otherwise, no, I think otherwise it's just, "Oh, you're so articulate. Wow, you speak so well. Your English is so good." I've been speaking English my whole life.
Actually, I kind of want to ask you because I don't think our listeners ever hear about the Canadian, just life in general, I kind of want to hear just what it's like in Canada, like weather-wise, people-wise, vibe-wise, mental health-wise. What has been, since you've been there for it sounds maybe about 6-ish years, 6, 7 years. So yeah, I just want to hear what's it like over there? What are the vibes?
Before you jump in there real quick, this is a personal question for him, listener, and just so that Refilo, this man is planning out his future, so just keep that in mind as you answer.
Well, Canada's where it's at. No, I'm kidding. I personally have enjoyed my time in Canada. Montreal, again, is a very diverse city. It's very international. There's a lot of schools that attract international students. And I think what I like about Montreal specifically is that it's got a very European feel to it. So that's kind of what attracted me to this particular city. Toronto, I think, feels a little like New York, whereas Montreal has more of a European-esque feel. Maybe it's the French influence that has that effect. But it's got a lot of character. There's a lot of really nice neighborhoods, very unique neighborhoods. There's Little Italy, there's Chinatown, there's all of these really nice parts to Montreal for sure. The weather was a big shock. People did warn me of the weather when I was leaving California and going to Canada. They were all like, "Girl, do you know that it's cold there?" I was like, "Oh, I could do this. It's going to be fun." I wish I listened because it's been wild. My first winter was very, very hard. There were days in the winter where I just couldn't believe that it was colder outside than it was in my freezer. Like, what is the point of me having my freezer running if I could just put everything outside? Like, why is it that cold? Why does that make sense? I think what also made the winter especially hard is the lack of sun. So winter feels like it goes on forever here. As of November, it starts snowing. The snow doesn't really end until like late April. Depending on where you are, Toronto is more mild than Montreal. If you're in Vancouver, it's a lot more mild than Montreal for sure. But I'm really speaking about my Montreal experience. But from November to essentially April, you don't get very much sun. It's cold. There's ice on the ground. You're slipping everywhere. That first winter, I remember being incredibly, incredibly sad, very low, very depressed. I didn't understand what was going on. I started seeing a therapist while I was in my first year at McGill. And she said, firstly, girl, with your black skin, you've got to be taking vitamin D. Your skin cannot deal with this lack of sunlight. Your body cannot deal with this lack of sunlight. You really need to be taking vitamin D supplements. So that's what I do every winter from September to, I guess, like summer, May, June. I also ended up getting a happy lamp. So it's one of these, like, I don't know, I don't think it's UV, but it's a really bright lamp that kind of imitates or mimics the sun in a way, and that's shown to really help your mood. And since doing those, my mood has really improved since that first winter. My therapist was like, look, girl, I need to tell you, seasonal affective disorder, it's a thing. That's why you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's normal. After that winter, I was like, why am I here? Why did I decide to come here? Is this what's going to be like every single winter? But the beautiful thing about Montreal is that you really get to experience all of the seasons. So you get the beautiful fall, you get the lovely foliage. It's, oranges and greens and browns. It's beautiful, very picturesque. And then, you obviously get the winter, which, I like to see the snow. It's very pretty to look at. Surprising to me, the world does not stop when it starts snowing. So you've just got to keep going, snowstorm or not, which was hard for me. But then, of course, come spring, everything starts to bloom again. There's a little bit more hope in the atmosphere. And then summer's a vibe, especially in Montreal. There's so much to do here. There's the International Jazz Fest. There's Just for Laughs that's hosted here in Montreal. There's various outdoor festivals and concerts and markets. There's a lot to do over the summer, and that kind of makes up for the winter, I find. So what I've been trying to do is go with the traditions that follow each season. And I think that helps me with my mental health as I move through each of the seasons. I can kind of prepare for winter and get excited for the Christmas market and mulled wine, which is like warm wine, but like with spices in it, or coming in out of the cold with some ramen or something to warm me up. So trying to really make the most of all the little things in the winter to really help with my mental health along the way. But otherwise, in terms of racial things, I think it seems like things are a lot worse in the US, at least from the side of the border. But not to say that there is no racism. I think that would be completely false to say that. There, of course, is systemic racism. There is, police brutality, not to the extent that is happening in the US, of course, but these things are definitely still there. So, yeah, you do get those experiences, but I don't know. I'm enjoying my time in Canada. It's been nice enough that I've stayed for 6 years, and I'm committing to stay for another 6 years. And yeah, it's just super international. So I meet people from everywhere, and that's been such an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question on that. How important do you think it is for international students to get into therapy when they are abroad? I know that it depends on kind of where you are, but since that's something you did, And that's something I'm looking into myself, just generally. And I know a couple other people who've gone into it. I don't know if it's a conversation a lot of us have, but as you're talking about, it kind of helped you deal with seasonal depression and stuff like that. But overall, how important do you think it is for international students to like look into therapy, and when should they start looking into it? Is it only when you start feeling bad, or as soon as you arrive, start looking into options, just because it's kind of good to get in the mood, in the like rhythm of things before maybe things like, you know, shit hits the fan or something?
I mean, I personally think it's important. I wouldn't force folks to go to therapy, of course, but I'm definitely a big therapy advocate. I've been seeing therapists for many, many years, and I swear by them. I think as international students, there are so many challenges that we come across that we could use with a little help to deal with them. You know, everything right from the culture shock. When you move to a new place, everything's different. The food's different, the languages are different, the smells are different, the people are different, the faces are, everything is so different. So just dealing with that change, I would even say that you could see a therapist right away. You don't need to wait until you're feeling super depressed and can't get out of bed to try go to therapy. I think you don't even need to have a diagnosed mental illness to go see a therapist. I think therapy is helpful in helping with relationships that you have with people, just navigating those, learning about yourself, learning about your behaviors, anything that you want to get rid of or you want to implement. Like I talk with my therapist about things like, oh, I'm trying to get back into working out and I'm not sure how to put it into my schedule. How do I do that? And then she talks about the little ways that I can do it, start small, all of that thing, all of those. I say this just really to say that you don't need to be in a bad place to seek out therapy. The nice thing with a lot of these institutions, especially if they have a big international student population, is that often you can access a therapist through your institution. I know at McGill, I'm seeing a therapist for free. I've been seeing therapists for free since I started. So I think it's super useful. I think it's very helpful. It's nice that it's free because therapy can be something that's very inaccessible. It can be very expensive. But I mean, I talk so much about therapy on my podcast, so I wasn't going to talk about it today, but you brought it up. I think, I don't know about your own backgrounds, but my parents didn't grow up really talking about mental illnesses or even just mental health in general. You know, when we think about mental health, we often think about depression, anxiety, all the illnesses, but you know, mental health is like physical health, right? Like you have good mental health, you have bad mental health, you have good physical health, you have bad physical health. Sorry. So I think therapy can help you manage your mental health. It can help you manage your course load, help you manage the stress that you're feeling. You know, coming from, you know, wherever you're coming from, you have all these pressures to perform, to be an ambassador, to, you know, your parents have sent you all this way across the world. You can't fail. You've got to come back with a degree. You've got to, you know, there's a lot of pressure and that can be a lot for people. So I like therapy. I personally would recommend it to anybody. That's just me.
No, that's good to hear. Actually, like I totally agree with that. Like I think we live coming from Africa, like we live with the perception that therapy is just not a Black people thing. So there is like a lot of that. And I think just to touch on that, I think it's also important, like for us as like international students living abroad, to actually speak to someone like on a regular basis, because like not that they necessarily understand everything you're going through, but someone who you can actually vent to, just have different discussions about, like when it comes to like your personal life, your professional life, and stuff like that. Like even when it comes to like your career, like for the most part, like 90% of people in the last year or so have worked from home. Like who have you had a conversation with? Like those kind of things do like paint a picture, like as to like, as much as like the people back home may think that it's all rosy out here, it's nice, it's beautiful, it is, but there also are those different challenges that you face, which is kind of a given, funny enough. So it is important for like you to speak to someone, because like I remember, I think a year or two ago, I think it was 2 years ago, like I would leave work and I would leave work and I would just turn around and just be at my TV, watch TV, have dinner, wake up the next day, rinse and repeat during the winter time. And there was never a point in time when I was like speaking to someone, like it's only maybe when I like speak to my family, like closer to the weekend or at the end of the week. It was just crazy. But for the most part, like I think it's all about just managing your mental health. And if you need to speak to someone, certainly do that. If you have your own remedy or something like that, you can certainly do that. Some people have different vices. Some are very straightforward, some are very strange. It's to each his own, essentially.
I want to speak to the point that you mentioned about how your therapist might not necessarily understand everything that you are saying, like all like the background that you're coming from. But in some instances, depending on your particular school, you could ask for a therapist who has a similar background as you. So whether that's a Black man or a man who might maybe understand your personal experiences better. I was happy that my first therapist ended up being a woman of color, an Indian woman. My current therapist is a white woman, but I mean, I feel like living abroad, well, a lot of the conversations that I've brought up have not been culture specific. It's more specific to me being in Canada, I guess, or grad school or, other things. But yeah, I mean, there are possibilities to try to find someone who has your background for sure.
Well, first of all, this has been bothering me ever since you said it, Rafua, and I just have to say it. It bothers me so much that when people are trying to talk to someone who doesn't know a language, they speak slowly. That is ridiculous. Like, who thinks that actually works? Like, they don't understand you, man. Like, they don't. Like, stop saying it slow. Like, it's not helping anyone. But anyways, other than that, I'm also just keen to understand because, like, high school can be a very interesting place. And I've been thinking about like you saying you went to the United States for 12th grade. And I've just been thinking like, wow, that must have been just a mind bog, like, because like we had a very unique experience at Waterford. I remember you saying you wish you went, and I'm sure you'd have had a great time. It was a lovely time. I'm sure the guys here would agree. But I'm keen to know, like, because we had very like, especially socially, moving to the United States for college was an adjustment to say the least. I'm keen to just know, like, 12th grade, going from Botswana to the US and joining in 12th grade when everyone, like you said, everyone's personalities and friend groups are already so well defined. How did you navigate? Did you end up being like, were you able to find a niche, like a friend group, a group of people, or were you like an outsider, like kind of hang on the fringes of society, doing your own thing? Like, what was your year 12 like in California?
I'd say that I did, on the first day that I arrived at the school, I was paired with somebody, like a buddy, given a buddy, which was helpful. She happened to be someone who's very nice and who I got along very well with, and she kind of adopted me into her friend group. But what was interesting was that the first 2 weeks that I was there, I felt like I was the shiny new toy. Like everybody was like, "Oh, Botswana, tell us about Botswana. Tell us about the school you went to. Are there elephants? Are there leopards? All of these questions. We're going to be such great friends." And then after those 2 weeks, it was kind of silent. Thankfully, I did have this buddy who I was paired to, and it ended up being that I ended up staying with her family for some of the time. Sorry, but yeah, it was definitely challenging. I think what helped was staying in contact with the other students from Botswana who were put at different schools. So each of us were sent individually to a different school. So we were all in a very similar situation. So we could kind of come together and talk about those things, commiserate. We could form our own little community through that. And I think that very much helped. I did speak to a therapist while I was at Menlo as well. In fact, I think she's called a guidance counselor. She came to me and was like, "Hey, look, if there's anything you need, I'm here. I'm willing to talk." And that was really nice. But it did take me a while to find my groove, to figure out where I fit in, to make friends. It was hard. It was really hard. I'd say even at McGill, it was hard because most of my classes were huge. I turned to the McGill African Student Society to try to find my community among them. I also joined the Black Students Network to try find people like me, people who look like me, people with similar backgrounds. And I think that's to anyone who's having a hard time finding friends, I think clubs are a great place to start. So any activities that you are into, if you play sports, if you play an instrument, if you whatever, I think those could be a great way to make your friends. So I'm kind of jealous to hear about your experience where you got to Luther College and, well, I mean, Mutsa, you went first, but Samson and Nkosi, you got there and Mutsa was there already, and you already had a community in place already. So I'm jealous to hear about that, but also I'm happy that you had that experience. I think as we're studying abroad, community is so important, no matter what that community is, whether it's a school community or, like I said, a club or whatever. I think those are most important. But it was hard. It was definitely hard, and I think also coming in feeling like the odd one out made it especially hard. Coming in feeling like this is not my first choice made it hard. I think I was a little closed-minded to the experience. So I would encourage anyone to be open-minded, be ready to meet new people, be ready to put yourself out there, which is hard, very, very hard. Join a club, just try to put yourself out there. So I'm wondering if there were any clubs that you joined to when you first moved to Luther College, and also starting work. What has that been like? Because I feel like as adults, it's harder to make friends, to meet people. It's not like you see each other in class all the time. I don't know if you're the types to befriend your colleagues, if that's something you're interested in. So what has that been like for you?
So my transition to Luther was, like Nkosi alluded to earlier, we knew each other, and it wasn't just Nkosi and I, it was Nkosi and I and another girl called Fez, who we also went to Waterford with. There's a guy called Wilson who Nkosi kind of knew. I think they knew kind of. So like there was like this small clique that existed day one, and then we also met a girl called Princess from South Africa and a guy called Teboho from Lesotho. So like there was like this small African network, and then also additional people from other UWC schools that we just hit it off, because like, okay, first the African people, like, yes, we get each other, and then the UWC people, yes, we have this other connection that we can hang on to. So we had that group. And then I think for me, especially like on a personal level, like as I went into class, I would always find people who I felt some sort of kinship with. Like it didn't matter like where it came from, like whether it was like my love for like music, or like when I was in my theater classes was like what movies people watch, what TV shows type of thing. And I'd build connections that way. And I'd also try to, like, my brother was there, so he knew a bunch of people who were in a few years above me. He graduated like the spring right before I joined, so he left in spring, I joined in fall. So there was a lot of overlap there that I could exploit. So like a lot of his old friends that were still there, I would go and hang out with on weekends, and just try to build connections like that. So yeah, that kind of helped me settle. And I would also say, like, freshman Samson was also a bit of a maverick, to be honest. I remember being very adventurous, just extremely adventurous. Like Friday night, Saturday night, I was out and about. I was doing something. I was off campus somewhere. I was hanging out with this person here. I was like, just meeting new people always. So it helped that for some reason that year I was just super adventurous, even though I'm a bit of an introvert, typically. But yeah, for some reason that year I guess I was comfortable. And because I sort of knew all these people, here and there, I felt comfortable to just move around and interact and do whatever. So yeah. How about you, Nkosi? How was your experience?
It was wonderful. Like, I was fortunate enough to actually play collegiate soccer my last 2 years, having played it my whole life. At that point, it was, I'd say, like a huge thing. Like, I really enjoyed it. Like, I met a lot of people from all walks of life, from Brazilians to Germans to French guys. It was just a wonderful experience. But for me, like, I do want to like just give a quick shout out. Like, there was a professor at Luther that I had like a specific, and I think most people did have a good rapport with. His name was Richard MTC, also from Zimbabwe, funny enough. So he was my guy. Even when I went on a study abroad in South Africa, I was with him, and we had a great time. So with him, I think that was like also like a point where like a point of reference on like just being free. In terms of clubs, I don't know. For me personally, like I didn't join any clubs. Just more or less just wanted to be a soccer player and be a college student. That's all I wanted. I didn't want any of these other side gigs. That was just me personally. And I don't know, like I'd say the rapport we had as like international students, because even though when we were freshmen, the seniors and the juniors that were at Luther were people that we knew in high school, but had never even spoken to. But we built some sort of relationship, some sort of friendship, because it was now a community, and they would share like a lot of advice to us on like what you should do, what you should look into, and stuff like that. But I also do want to give a quick shout out to another brother here that, funny enough, Samson doesn't mention him, and he's been on our podcast for the last couple of weeks. Another brother we met there at Luther College, great guy from Ghana. His name is Nana. Uh, Shout out to him. And I think like that's another brother we met, and we built that camaraderie with him. Because funny enough, like for I think the better part of like a year or two, technically three, Samson, myself, Nana, and Wilson all stayed together. Speaking of Wilson, Wilson is from Swaziland, for those that don't know. His name is Ndaloye Ngosi, and my name is Ngosi. So it's very common there. I didn't know him per se. It was only when I met him at Luther, I had heard of him. Great individual, that man, great individual, and had the pleasure of spending some time with him when he worked here in Minneapolis. Did live with him for a better part of, I think, close to a year.
Just very quickly, I did forget to say, one of the two student unions I was a part of were the African Student Union and the Black Student Union. I really, I appreciated those ones because, like, number one, freshman year, sophomore year, it gave me something to do. Because you'd get done with homework and you're like, like what now? But also, like, I met a lot of people there, and you talk about building connections and all that kind of stuff. Like, I still talk to those people like to this day, and some of the professors that were involved in those organizations too. So yeah, Black Student Union, African Student Union. If you're from the forest and you want to go to college in the States, those are two great resources, and they're typically at most schools, I'd say. Ours was called, I guess, did we have an African Student Union, or was it yeah, it was the International Student Union. My bad. Although we did, it was like depending on the year, it did kind of look like an African Student Union, or I guess some years it looked like an Asian Student Union. Other years, just kind of depending on the numbers that year. But yeah, look out for those student unions if you're an incoming freshman in the United States.
I didn't mention this. I was in an a cappella group in undergrad. That was my community. It was a good time. It's peak nerdy, but it was a good time. I wanted to ask, so I've been thinking about this quite a bit. You are the Forest Brothers. I'm trying to make the connection between the topics that you cover and the name, the Forest Brothers. So could you tell me a little bit about where this name comes from? What's your origin story?
The origin story. So in general, just I think I don't even know how this thing started. But essentially, if you come from Africa, we say you're from the forest, because Africa is like woody and it's just plants. I don't know actually. I honestly have no idea how this started. I don't know if Nkosi or whatever. Like when we were actually coming up with the name for the pod, we always used to say brothers. We call ourselves brothers, and then we also come from the forest because that's what we used to say. And I was like, let's just call the pod the Forest Brothers, and that's just how it came. I don't know why we call Africa the forest. It's just something we say. So if you ever hear us say the forest, it's Africa. That's just Black people in Africa. Just those are the forest. But that's how it started.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. So the name, the Forest Brothers Podcast, I'd say came about because like it was like we were essentially like living up to expectation on like the name. In essence, as Mut has mentioned, it was a matter of we're all from Africa, and the general perception of the general world as a whole is that Africa is a jungle, Africa is a forest. And us all coming from the motherland, we were like, let's lean into that. Let's call our podcast the Forest Brothers from a marketing perspective, as well as like just to stand out essentially in the industry. Like that was like the big piece. And I feel like you as an individual, like be it a person who's listening to the for the first time or just seeing it out there on the internet somewhere, you certainly remember the name the Forest Brothers, but you won't remember another podcast that just has a standard name. This is a very unique name in that way.
Yeah, but no, it's been a good ride. But you know what? I think it's as we close down here, as we wind down, it's just important as well for like our listeners still, in college thinking about, moving different places or high school students. I think Rafil brought this up about, just advice would give to our younger selves and just advice to like people looking at different study opportunities abroad, So going first, I can always say, to my younger self, but actually, what would I say? I think I'll tell myself it's gonna be okay. I think that's like the biggest thing. Cause hey man, you worry. Like when you graduate in college, people are stressing you about, actually even before you go, it's probably like, where you gonna go? How many points did you get after IB? Which school can you get into? This is a good school, this is the bad school. And then you make a plan, you go somewhere. And then when you're in college and you're sitting here about to go to you're about to graduate, where you gonna work? Where you gonna live? Questions like that. And it's like, damn, it's like always something. It's like, man, does this never stop? The race never stops. But I think at the end, it's like, you'll figure it out. Just be more kinder to yourself. It'll work out. Just try your best and it'll be okay. I think that's kind of like what I would say to my younger self. Like, your journey is yours. No two journeys are the same. Your path is, there were people that I used to look up to and I see where they are now and where I'm at now. And it's like, I think I'm happy with where I'm at, not to say, life goes differently. People make choices, right? At the end of the day, the choices you make like kind of influence what you do and stuff. So I don't want to sound like my dad, but anyway, so it's just, yeah, just kind of, you're doing well. Just keep it pushing and you'll find yourself on the other side. I think that's kind of like an advice to younger self, me. And to a high school student, I would just say, look at all the options. Look at your long-term plan. Like, if I started out in high school knowing what I know now about Canada and the USA and the UK, I think the UK it's a little bit longer. But if I knew about Canada, like post-graduating college, because I didn't tell you about that, I think I would have focused a little bit more on applying to Canada. If I knew that I'll have a more stable future there. But obviously the pros and cons. You might not make as much money in Canada. It's colder there, things like that. But if your main objective is to like leave, let's say Zimbabwe, and you want to live somewhere stable, Canada is a good shout because you might spend money out of pocket, but long term it makes sense. So I would say don't let people push you to one side, look at all the options, figure out what exactly you want to do, especially after you graduate. And hopefully that'll give you a bit more clarity in terms of where you should go and how you should go about it. But that's just me. So I can pass it on to you, Refilwe, as someone who is in a different area than us. But what's your advice for both counts?
So to somebody who's to high school students who are looking to study abroad, I would say don't hesitate to reach out to people, even reaching out to people that you don't know. I think a lot of people are a lot more willing to help than you expect. So whether that's on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, just saying, hi, I'm interested in being in the country that you're in, or I'm interested in following the path that you're in. A lot of people are willing to help. I'm sure the Forest brothers here would be happy to help if you were to send any of them a message asking how to get onto their paths, whether it's to study computer science, go to the UK or go to Iowa, any of those, I'm sure they'd be very happy to. And I also would be very happy to help with any of those. So don't hesitate to reach out. I started the platform Journey Abroad exactly for this reason, to create a resource for people. So yeah, look through any of the guests that I've had in the past, and any of them, I guarantee you will happily answer any questions that you have about either the degree, the program, the country, whatever it is. Don't hesitate to reach out to anybody, even if you don't know them. And then to my younger self, but to really anyone younger than me, especially if you're studying abroad, you are a unicorn. You are one of a kind in your space. Use that to your advantage. We often think about where we're lacking and the things that where we fall short, but I encourage you to think about the things that you can bring to the table. You come with a very, very unique and different background, especially compared to a lot of other students at predominantly white institutes. So you've got, the experience of, in your case, the Forest brothers here, of studying at, a United World College. That's a unique experience that you could bring forward to the table. Anything that you've learned along the way, use it to your advantage. In personal statements, I make sure that I write, as a Black woman. I don't explicitly say it like that, but I kind of allude to that. And, especially now, especially in North America, especially after 2020, diversity is the in thing, and people are really looking for diversity. So remember that you are unique, you are a unicorn in your space, and really use that to your advantage for job applications, college applications, grad school applications, whatever it is. Use your diversity to your advantage. So I'll pass it on to Nkosi.
Thank you. Well said there. Well said there, if you look. And I would totally agree with what you just mentioned there regarding like just people reaching out. Like the First Brothers podcast is a very open platform. The brothers, as we've mentioned, are very open to helping out. So if you do reach out, you're able to find us on pretty much all socials and on any platform. I think, well, we're always ready to help because there's people that have gone before us that have helped us get to where we're at today, and it's only fitting that we actually give back to the next generation. Speaking of the next generation, I think for me personally, like upcoming young people, I think the advice I'd give to them on like just what to do, like when it comes to like looking at this opportunity, like to study abroad, is honestly it's just research. Like all this stuff lives on the internet. The time you take just watching YouTube videos 3 to 4 hours a day, just take 2 hours of that time and just do a quick Google search on like what options do I have abroad on like just education, like opening my mind to like, oh, I can go to the school. I just need to do 1, 2, 3 because it's not a whole like difficult process. You just need to follow the right procedures to actually be able to be successful. Like there are many stories where people have mentioned that I didn't know about it until I just did some quick research. Now I'm working at a big company in the United States or in UK or even in Canada, funny enough. So I think that's the biggest one. I'd say advice I'd give to my younger self. Honestly, mine's a bit unique in that I'd say like I discovered upon my personally like just my career at a later stage. Like I had gone down a path on like thinking about I want to do something along the lines of engineering or switching over to starting to do more or less along the lines of okay, I can do some computer science. And then later on, then switching to data, and that's when I found my niche. Because at the end of the day, like even when you talk to your parents, like as much as parents do guide you to do what you need to do, that shouldn't be like your one thing that you focus on. Like you should start to also think about yourself because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be in this career and not them. It's a good career for them. If they talk about careers, like it's a good thing that they mentioned, But also at the end of the day, what is your happiness? You don't want to go to a job where you'll be miserable for 30 to 40 years. And just because your parents said so. It's about, I'd say for my younger self, is like just getting alignment with your parents and just talking about like, yo, actually, I want to go study this. What do you think? Having that open conversation with them. Yeah, I think it actually goes a long way, honestly. I think that's like the one thing I'd actually tell myself. But personally, like I would think that where I'm at currently, like everything happens for a reason. I'm here where I'm at today because of that. And I'm at a happy place. Samson, what would you tell young Masanga there as he's growing up there back in Kenya?
Well, that guy in Kenya, I have no idea what to tell him because he was like 10. But the young Samson that was at Waterford, I'd tell him that number one, you are ill-equipped to make decisions about what major you should be taking in college because you have no idea what the job market looks like. And also, I think that young guy was very fortunate that there was a sort of tech boom while he was in college, and you kind of see it in the job market in the States for tech jobs worked out pretty well. I think that kid gambled and it worked out pretty well. But yeah, some other piece of advice I'd give him is that I think, and this is for all young people, I think trust yourself, you know. I I I think I don't think I know. I had more than just my mental knowledge, you know. I wasn't just good at math and English and geography and all these other subjects. Like I used to draw a lot when I was a kid. I used to paint a little bit. Um, so I always had like an artistic side, which I always felt I had to suppress to a certain degree because it wasn't viewed as highly by, my parents in terms of like academics, compared to other things. So I always kind of pushed it down, pushed it aside. But growing up, I realized that all this stuff is like pretty much applicable even in your day-to-day job. Like it's like even though, you know, computer science is basically math, some of these problems, there's like a design element to it in some way. So if you have some additional knowledge in something else, you should use that. So that's to all the young kids out there, um, whose parents are telling them, "Hey, stay away from the choir or stay away from theater, stay away from this, like no, like trust yourself. And if you want to do something and you think you're good at it, uh, believe in yourself and go try it out. Because when I got to college, I tried out theater because I wanted to, and also because I felt like I could. I was finally in a space where someone wasn't going to look at me and say, "Hell no, like you're not doing that." I actually could decide for myself. As soon as I left my parents' care, I was officially fully an adult, and I was responsible for every decision I was making. So if you can just begin to trust yourself early on, I think you can see a lot of things happen for you early on, a lot of different opportunities open up. Because again, one thing I've learned as an adult is that the job market is constantly changing. Gone are the days where you do one job for 40 years. My dad himself is a career accountant. He went into management about 15 years in. He's now a farmer. Like he farms chickens and like for a living, and makes chicken feed. So like that's how much it's changed, and that's just in his lifetime. Imagine in ours, you might end up doing 3-4 different jobs in 3-4 different industries. So if you have skills that don't fit with what is the you know academic consensus wherever you're from, trust it. If you like it and you are really good at it, just trust yourself and never ever let anyone allow you to doubt who you are. Just live your truth and live it unapologetically every day, and I promise you it will pay off in the long run.
Great words of advice from all of you. Wow. Wow. I feel like listeners will take so much from this episode. before we wrap up, for my listeners, how can they find the Forest Brothers? Where can they find the Forest Brothers?
You can find the Forest Brothers on Instagram. We are actually, don't even look before I lie to listeners out there. What is our Instagram? Honestly, we just tap the Forest Brothers Podcast on Instagram. You will find us. We are, on Instagram at the Forest Brothers Podcast. We're also on Twitter at the Forest Brothers, but BRTHRS, something like that. But yeah, we'll put our handles on the social media stuff. But you can find us on Twitter, on Insta. And so you can find us. And actually, for you too, Rafula, how can our listeners, because we have a lot of African listeners, how can they find Journey Abroad online?
So you can follow Journey Abroad on Instagram. So I believe it is Journey Abroad _podcast. I'm also on Twitter, a little less active on Twitter than I am on Instagram, but it is also Journey Abroad _, I believe. And then in terms of where you can listen to the podcast, wherever you catch your favorite shows, wherever you listen to the Forest Brothers, I'm sure you'll find Journey Abroad there too.
Indeed. Well, we should do this more often. I feel like the Forest Brothers. Honestly, guys, you'll be hearing more from her. There's so much. I think we've grilled her a lot today, but there's more grilling in the future. Best believe it. So, I think next time we talk to her, maybe it should be, when are you graduating? When are you gonna be a full neuroscientist?
So you don't ask a PhD student when they're graduating because the answer is never. In reality. In reality, I'm aiming for about 4 years from now. So 2026 is what I'm aiming for. We'll see how things go. The interesting thing with PhDs is that nobody really tells you what to do and when to do it. So you just got to roll with it and plan it along the way. So I'm hoping for 4 years, but I'm still around. I'm happy for so many more conversations among us. I'm happy to have more panel discussions like this. This is such an interesting format. I've never done it like this, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time speaking with you. Yes, you grilled me. Next time I'm grilling you. Be warned, be ready.
Well, listen, if you're ready for some grilled African, keep tuning in. You'll be here. So yeah, actually we'll be on the journey with her, and then finally we won't even just be calling her Refila, and we'll be saying doctor. I don't even won't be saying her name, it'll be doctor. She'll be the leading neuroscientist in the next 7-ish years. So just look out for her. You never know. So yeah. Thank you so much, listener, for tuning in with us. It was a bit of a long one, but I think a very good one. And we're going to look forward to having so many more. I think, let me let Nkosi, Refilwe, Samson say goodbyes, and we'll close it out.
Listener, oh, maybe I just got the order wrong. Maybe I was just getting too excited with just this collaboration, honestly. But certainly, I'd like to say thank you to our guest here, Refilwe. I don't even know if she's our guest or it's just a homecoming with another person from the great continent of the forest, honestly. But I'd like to say thank you for taking the time on this lovely day and actually gracing us with your presence. I think what you shared with us is going to go a long way for our listeners out there, and as well as your listeners, on just hearing our experiences, on just being here in the US. I think that goes a long way. And I'd like to also just say thank you to my two brothers here from the forest, Mr. Masanga, Mr. Mwari, Makufa. It's a great ride. So honestly, listener, if you want to tune in, there's another podcast that you can certainly tune in when you have time. There is the Journey Abroad podcast. I'll be certainly tuning in the next coming weeks. I'm very interested to hear what they discuss on a weekly basis there. And of course, you can always tune into the Forest Brothers podcast. We're always ready to deliver great content, and thank you.
Dear listeners, once again, you have been with the Forest Brothers podcast in collaboration with the Journey Abroad podcast. Wow. Today that has been a challenge. Today has been a challenge. Oh my God. But yeah, it's been great being with you, dear listener. Great being here with my two brothers, Mutsa, Mangoro. Great being here with the great Refilwe. Respectfully, Refilwe, I will say I hope I never have to meet you in a professional setting, because if I do, things have gone horribly wrong. Although if I am, I hope it's you. I hope, like, because I feel like you'll be at the top of the game. So I'll be in good hands. But I respectfully, no, I do not. I hope we never have to meet professionally. But yeah, it's been a great pod, and I think there's so much more to discuss. And I look forward to it. I look forward to having you on future pods, having more collaborations, more panels, as you said. And yeah, we'll catch y'all on the next one. It has been the Forest Brothers podcast in collaboration with the Journey Abroad podcast. I had to say it right for one more time, just so I can sleep easy at night, because I wasn't gonna sleep well knowing I beefed that twice. But now I got it right. So yeah, I'm out.
You got it at the end there, Samson. And don't worry, we'll keep our meetups to strictly casual, strictly podcast based. So don't you worry. It has been a wonderful, wonderful time chatting with all of you, Mutsa, Samson, Nkosi. Great conversations, great chats, great advice. And thank you for sharing your experience. I think these kinds of conversations are very much necessary. They can be a very useful resource to people. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for this collaboration. I'm very excited for future collaborations that we will have. And to the listener, until next time, bye.